I'll never forget the first time I laid eyes on my granddaughter. It wasn't the way I imagined it would be, not at all. I had dreamt of holding her in my arms, of smiling at my son and daughter-in-law as we welcomed this new chapter together. But instead, I found myself standing on the outside, separated by cold, unfeeling walls, both literal and emotional. I had been there every step of the way during my daughter-in-law's pregnancy. I supported them financially, emotionally, and physically. I had even paid for their baby shower, the nursery furniture, and most of the other little things that come with a new baby. I thought it was what any loving grandmother would do. I wasn't just involved. I was deeply invested in this little one's future. I'd been dreaming about being a grandmother for years. I would be there for every milestone, every birthday, and I would spoil my grandchild like I never got to do with my own children. My son Derek had always been close to me, and I thought my bond with him and his new family would be something beautiful. But when my granddaughter was born, everything changed. From the moment I arrived at the hospital, I felt it. The tension in the air was palpable. My son greeted me with a smile, but there was a hesitation in his eyes I couldn't quite place. He ushered me into the waiting room, away from the maternity floor, where I could hear the sound of newborn cries echoing down the hall. I thought I'd be allowed to be with my son and daughter-in-law when they met their baby for the first time. But instead, I was pushed into a corner, left to sit there for hours while everyone else, his in-laws, his friends, even strangers, paraded in and out the room. It was like I wasn't even there. At first, I tried to ignore it. I convinced myself that maybe they were just caught up in the moment. After all, having a baby is a huge deal, right? But as the hours dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I had offered to help in every way I could, but instead of appreciating my support, I felt like I was becoming a burden. The nurses came in and out, offering polite smiles, but none of them really engaged with me. When I asked if I could hold the baby, I was met with a stiff, "We'll see." When my daughter-in-law's mother showed up, everything shifted. They were practically running the show, treating the hospital room like it was their own personal event. I stayed back, hoping for a moment, any moment, where I could just be with my granddaughter. But that moment never came. I remember one instance clearly. My daughter-in-law, Claire, walked past me with my son as they made their way to the baby's room. She didn't even look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence. It hurt. But worse, it felt like it was on purpose. My son caught my eye for just a second, and I saw something in his expression, a look of guilt and helplessness. He knew I was being shut out. He knew I wanted to be there, to hold my granddaughter, to take part in this monumental moment of our lives. But he did nothing to stop it. That night, as the family settled in for a group dinner, I ended up eating in the hallway, alone. The food was cold, and no one seemed to notice. Claire's family was seated at the head of the table, and there I was, relegated to the periphery. I sat at a small table near the door, pretending that everything was fine, but inside, I felt like I was disappearing. I tried to engage in small talk with a few of Derek's cousins, but every conversation felt superficial. Every word felt meaningless. It wasn't long before Claire's mother, Linda, began making little comments, always thinly veiled, always passive-aggressive. "I just don't know if it's healthy for a baby to be surrounded by so much negativity," she'd say, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. At first, I thought I misheard her, but when it happened again the next day, I realized that she was talking about me. It wasn't just me either. I had heard whispers that my energy was toxic, or that I had a poor aura that could negatively affect a newborn. I was stunned. I had never been so disrespected in my life. But the worst part wasn't the hurtful comments or the exclusion. It was that Derek, my son, the one I had raised, the one I thought would always stand by me, did nothing. He didn't defend me. He didn't tell his mother or his wife that I was family, that I had every right to be there, to see my granddaughter. Instead, he stayed silent, retreating into the background. In that moment, I knew things would never be the same. This wasn't just about Claire's family. It was about the fact that my son had chosen them over me. The next morning, when I tried to reach out, Derek and Claire had already planned a visit with her side of the family. They didn't invite me, not even to see the baby. I had never felt so invisible in my life. In the weeks that followed, I received no updates on the baby. No pictures, no phone calls. Every time I tried to get in touch, I was met with excuses. She's napping, or we're just busy right now. And I could see it, the subtle exclusion. They didn't want me there. My presence was inconvenient. I was a reminder of something they couldn't control, and that made them uncomfortable. My granddaughter, the child I had already begun to love with all my heart, was being kept from me, and I had no idea why. I was being punished for something I couldn't even understand. All the years I spent supporting Derek and Claire, all the sacrifices I made to help them build a life, now seemed meaningless. My love for my son and his new family didn't matter. The money I spent, the time I invested, it was all for nothing. I wasn't just being ignored, I was being erased. It felt like the whole world had turned against me. The family I had known for so long, the family I thought I'd be part of forever, had turned their back on me. All because of something I couldn't even change, my poor aura. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that things would calm down. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The longer this went on, the more I realized that this wasn't just about the baby. This was about power, control, and how they had decided that I didn't belong in their version of the family. I wasn't even given the chance to prove myself. And that's when I realized I had to make a choice. I could let them treat me like this, or I could do something about it. The days following the birth of my granddaughter were a blur of confusion, frustration, and heartbreak. I kept my distance at first, trying to give them space, thinking they just needed time to adjust to the chaos that comes with a newborn. I tried not to be too persistent, but with every passing day, it felt like I was slipping further and further away from their lives, like I was becoming an afterthought. And then came the accusations. It started with subtle comments. At first, they were easily ignored. Little things like, "You should take it easy, Veronica," or "Maybe you need to be more mindful of your energy around the baby." But as the days stretched on, these comments became sharper, more pointed, until they couldn't be dismissed as casual remarks anymore. I remember one afternoon when I stopped by to drop off some groceries for them. Claire's mother, Linda, was there, and we sat in the living room for a while, chatting. I tried to keep the conversation light, but Linda seemed unusually tense. Her eyes flicked around nervously, avoiding mine. I wasn't sure if it was me or if something else was going on, but the atmosphere felt off. It wasn't until after a long, strained silence that she finally spoke. "You know, Veronica," she began, her voice low and almost too calm. "It's hard to have a baby with all that negative energy around. Babies are sensitive, you know." I felt my stomach tighten. I could feel my heart racing in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. I knew what she was implying, but I couldn't fathom why she would say such a thing. Had I ever been anything but supportive? Before I could respond, she continued, her words cutting through the quiet room like a knife. "You've been a bit draining lately. Maybe it's time to take a step back, give them some space. Claire and Derek are doing just fine without all the added pressure." The nerve, the sheer nerve of her. Here I was, trying to do everything I could to help, and she was suggesting that I was the problem, that I was somehow too much, too demanding, too negative. It wasn't just Linda either. Slowly, the comments started coming from everyone. Derek's cousins, Claire's friends, even the neighbors. They all started saying the same thing, almost in unison. "Veronica, maybe you should focus on your own energy," or "The baby doesn't need all this negativity." And the worst part, Derek, my son, the one I had supported through everything, just let it happen. He never said a word, not one word to defend me, not one word to stand up for the mother who had raised him, who had put her heart and soul into their lives, who had sacrificed so much to see him happy. It felt like the walls were closing in. Every time I tried to call or text Derek, he would make excuses. "Oh, Claire's a little tired today," or "We're busy with the baby, Mom." It was always something. I couldn't even get a moment of time to just talk to my son. He was pulling away, retreating further into his wife's family, into their influence. I was becoming a shadow in their world. One night I received a letter. It was from Claire's family, addressed to me personally. I sat down on the couch with shaking hands, the envelope feeling heavy in my grasp. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I certainly wasn't prepared for what I read. The letter was filled with accusations, laced with judgment, wrapped in condescension. They spoke of my negative energy, as though it was a tangible thing that could be seen, touched, and measured. They claimed that I had been critical of Claire's parenting, that my constant questioning of their choices had put unnecessary pressure on them. They even suggested that I wasn't welcome around the baby because they believed my presence would somehow affect her well-being. I felt the breath leave my chest. I was stunned. After all I had done, after everything I had given, I was being painted as the villain in this story. It was as if everything I had done for them, all the sacrifices I had made, had been erased, replaced with this false image of me as someone toxic and difficult. The woman who had been there through every step of their journey, the one who had worked tirelessly to help them get to where they were, was now the enemy. I spent hours sitting there, staring at that letter, trying to make sense of it. It didn't feel real. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of confusion, each word in the letter pulling me deeper under. How could they not see it? How could they not understand? I had given them everything. I had poured my heart into them, and this was how they repaid me? But even as the hurt welled up inside me, a part of me, deep down, knew this wasn't about me. This wasn't even about the baby. This was about control. Claire's family had never really accepted me, and now they were making sure that I knew my place. They were making it clear that I was not wanted, that I was not part of their version of the family. I held the letter in my hands and wondered, was it worth it to keep trying? Was it worth it to keep fighting for a place that they never really wanted me to have in the first place? How could I continue to fight for a relationship when they had already made it clear that I was the problem? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done being the person they expected me to be. The person who would keep putting up with their constant dismissal, their cruel words, and their exclusion. I had given them everything I had, and this is how they chose to repay me. No more. It was time for me to decide what was best for me, even if that meant stepping away from a family that had never really been mine. The sting of the accusations still burned, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being unappreciated. But even amidst the hurt, one thought kept lingering in the back of my mind: my granddaughter. She was so young, so innocent, and I couldn't let the ugliness of the situation taint my love for her. I had never been allowed to form a deep bond with her, and that crushed me more than I could say. But I could still do something. I could still make sure that she knew, no matter what, how much I cared for her. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how little the in-laws truly understood me. They saw my actions as attempts to control, to intrude. They didn't see the love behind my gestures, the desire to be part of their lives. So I decided that if they wanted to keep me away from their family, I would find another way to show my granddaughter how much I loved her, without needing their approval. I had always believed in giving gifts that meant something, gifts that would last, that would hold value over time. I wanted to give my granddaughter something special for her first birthday, something that would carry my love for her beyond the confines of their narrow view of me. But I wasn't just going to give her a toy or a piece of jewelry. I wanted to give her something that would last for generations, something that would belong to her forever. I thought about it for weeks, and then it hit me: 2 luxury villas. Not just one, but 2. One by the ocean, a serene and beautiful place, perfect for family vacations. The other in the mountains, a retreat surrounded by nature, offering peace and quiet. Both would be named in her honor, the the deed signed over to her as an investment for her future, a legacy that she would inherit when the time was right. I knew this was an extravagant gesture, but I didn't care. My love for her was beyond what words could express. And I realized something. These villas weren't just for her. They were my way of showing her that I had always been there, even if I wasn't allowed to be physically present in her life. The ocean villa would be a place where her family could spend their summers, a place filled with memories, with laughter, and with love. The mountain villa would be a sanctuary, a place where she could escape the noise of the world and find peace when life got overwhelming. I imagined her there, growing up in those beautiful places, knowing they were gifts from a grandmother who loved her more than she could ever understand. The next step was finding the perfect properties. I spent hours researching, looking at different locations, and envisioning what each villa could be. I wanted them to be beautiful, but I also wanted them to be practical, spaces that would accommodate family gatherings, holidays, and quiet moments of solitude. After weeks of searching, I found 2 perfect properties that matched my vision. Both had stunning views, and both were within reach of the family's lifestyle, yet completely outside of their expectations. The day I sealed the deal was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. It felt like reclaiming a small piece of control in a situation where I had none. I stood in the middle of that luxurious villa by the ocean, feeling the warm sun on my face, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel proud. Proud of my decision, proud of my love for my granddaughter, and proud of the fact that I could still make a meaningful impact in her life, even if it wasn't the way they wanted. I had already made the arrangements to have both villas ready for her birthday, but I didn't plan to tell anyone, certainly not Claire or her family. They would never understand it, and they would probably see it as just another way for me to interfere with their lives. So I kept it a secret, tucking the deeds away, feeling their weight in my hands every time I thought of her. I knew this wouldn't erase the hurt they had caused me, but somehow it made me feel like I was doing the right thing. It wasn't about trying to buy their approval. It was about leaving a piece of me behind for my granddaughter, a piece that would stand as a testament to the love I had always wanted to give her, no matter how they treated me. The villas were my silent rebellion. They were my way of showing that I wasn't the bitter, negative person they painted me to be. I wasn't just the grandmother who was pushed aside. I was someone who would always do everything in her power to show love, even if it wasn't received in the way I hoped. I didn't need their permission to love my granddaughter, and I didn't need their permission to give her something that would mean more than any apology or acknowledgement they could ever give me. The days leading up to my granddaughter's first birthday were filled with tension. I had decided to keep my gift a secret from Claire and the rest of the family. There was no need for them to know about the villas just yet. After all, I didn't want them to twist my gesture into something manipulative or self-serving. My heart ached with the thought that they would never truly understand why I had done it. Still, I couldn't let my granddaughter's birthday pass without acknowledging her. I wanted her to feel my love, even if it had to be in the most indirect way possible. The villas were ready, and I had arranged a private meeting with my son, Ryan, a week before the celebration. I figured that if anyone should know about the gift first, it would be him. After all, the villas were for his daughter, too. I had to tell him somehow, though I knew it would be hard for him to comprehend the depth of my feelings in a situation like this. The meeting was scheduled for the evening, when he'd be finished with work. I prepared myself emotionally, knowing it might not go the way I hoped, but I couldn't hold back any longer. I had to reveal the truth about what I had done in my granddaughter's name, despite the way I had been treated. When he arrived, I didn't know where to start. I had the keys to both villas in a velvet box, tucked neatly inside my bag. I didn't want him to see the gift before I explained it all, so I simply sat him down in the living room and started talking. "Ryan, I've been thinking about Sophie a lot," I began, my voice steady but thick with emotion, "about how much I've been left out of her life and how hurt I've felt by all of this. But the one thing I want you to understand is that none of this changes how much I love her. I've always loved her from the moment I heard she was coming into the world, and I want her to know that." I could see the confusion in his eyes, his brows furrowing as he tried to piece together what I was saying. He had always been more of a passive observer in the family, never one to challenge the status quo, but I could see that he felt uncomfortable. I don't blame him. He had been caught in the middle of a toxic situation, and it wasn't fair to him. I pulled out the velvet box, placed it carefully on the coffee table between us, and slid it toward him. Ryan hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should open it. He knew something important was inside, but I could tell he wasn't sure how to react. "Mom, what's this?" he asked quietly, picking up the box with tentative fingers. "Open it," I urged him. I tried to steady my breathing as I watched him. "It's for Sophie's birthday." He slowly lifted the lid, and inside, the keys to both villas rested, glinting softly in the light. His eyes widened as he looked at me, shocked, but unsure of what to say. The moment hung heavy in the air. "2 villas?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, why?" I smiled, though it felt bittersweet. I was proud of the gesture, but it hurt that he didn't fully understand yet. I wanted Sophie to have something special, something no one could take away from her. I know it's a lot, too much maybe, but I want her to have a future where she knows she's loved, even if I'm not able to be there as much as I'd like. These villas are for her. One is by the ocean for family vacations, and the other is in the mountains, a peaceful place for when she needs to get away. They're hers. One day she'll understand why I did this. Ryan was silent for a long moment, staring at the keys in his hands. The words he wanted to say seemed to elude him, and I could see the conflict in his face. It must have been hard for him to reconcile this unexpected gesture with the way I had been treated by his wife and her family. In many ways, I think he was overwhelmed by the enormity of what I had done. "Mom, I don't know what to say," he finally murmured. "I didn't know you were planning this. I had no idea." I nodded, understanding his hesitation. He hadn't been part of this decision, and the weight of it must have felt heavy on his shoulders. But I didn't want him to carry the burden of guilt. This was my choice, my way of loving my granddaughter. And I wanted him to know that it was never about him or about trying to manipulate anyone. It was about Sophie, and about showing her that her grandmother would always be there, even if the circumstances were difficult. "I know, Ryan," I said softly, "and I don't want you to feel like you're in the middle of anything, but I needed you to know what I've done. This is for Sophie's future, not mine. I don't need anything in return. I just want her to have something that will remind her of my love, even if I can't be there to hold her hand every day." Ryan placed the keys back in the box and looked up at me. There was a look of understanding in his eyes now, though I could tell he was still processing everything. For the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe, just maybe, he saw me differently. He wasn't ready to defend me against his wife or her family, but I could see a flicker of respect in his gaze. It was a small victory, but it was something. I left that evening feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. I had done something grand, something that spoke volumes about my love for Sophie. But I knew it was just the beginning. The real test would come when Claire found out. And I wasn't sure what would happen then. Would they accept it, or would they turn it into another reason to push me away? I didn't know. But one thing was certain, I had given my granddaughter something that would always remind her of me, even if I was never able to be the grandmother they wanted me to be. It didn't take long for the news of my gift to reach Claire and her family. When I received the call, I could hear the sharpness in Claire's voice. Even though she was trying to keep calm, she didn't thank me for the villas. She didn't express any gratitude. Instead, she launched into an immediate attack on what she perceived as an inappropriate gesture. "Mom," she said, her voice tight, "I don't understand why you would do something like this. Why would you give Sophie 2 villas? That's just too much. It's not your place to buy her affection." I was taken aback by her reaction. I had expected some discomfort or confusion, but not outright hostility. My mind raced as I tried to understand how my offering of love had turned into something so offensive to her. How had something so innocent, so generous, been twisted into something manipulative in her eyes. Claire, I said, trying to remain calm. I didn't do this to buy her affection. I did it because I love her. I want her to have something special, something that would last, something she could remember me by, even if I can't be a part of her life the way I want to. Claire's silence on the other end of the line was unnerving. I could almost feel the tension building in the space between us. When she spoke again, her words were sharper, more pointed. I'm sorry, but you can't just come into our lives and start making decisions like this. It feels like you're trying to overstep your boundaries, trying to take control. Sophie isn't some project for you to invest in. The sting of her words hit me hard, but I didn't let it show. I had expected judgment from her family, but hearing it from Claire, of all people, felt like a deep betrayal. I had spent so much time and effort trying to be there for her, trying to help, to support, and yet all she could see was an ulterior motive. I tried to explain again, this time more carefully. It's not about control, Claire. It's about love. I want Sophie to have a future, something she can enjoy, and something that will remind her of me, even if I'm not there. I thought it was a gift, a way of showing her that I care. Her response was swift and cutting. Well, you've gone too far. We don't want your gifts. We don't need your money, and we certainly don't need your interference in our lives. If this is your way of buying your way into Sophie's life, then I don't want any part of it. The words stung like a slap in the face. I had always known that Claire wasn't the easiest to please, but I never imagined she would accuse me of trying to manipulate my own granddaughter. My chest tightened, but I held my ground, refusing to let her make me feel guilty for trying to do something kind. Before I could respond, I heard Ryan's voice in the background, quiet and unsure. Claire, maybe we should talk about this later. But I could tell he wasn't really speaking up for me. His voice was passive, almost like he was afraid of upsetting his wife. I'd seen it happen before, the way he would withdraw whenever there was conflict. But it still hurt to see it now, when I needed his support the most. Claire didn't give me the chance to say anything more. I'll talk to you later, she snapped, before hanging up the phone, leaving me with a ringing silence. I sat there in disbelief, the weight of her words settling heavily on my chest. I had never wanted to be a burden on my son's family, and yet, here I was, being treated as if my love for my granddaughter was some kind of insult. How had it come to this? How had I gone from being a loving grandmother who was willing to help them in any way I could, to being accused of trying to buy their affection? The next few days were filled with tension. I could feel the judgment in the air whenever I saw Claire or her family, even though they never said anything directly to my face. They didn't have to. It was clear from their cold shoulders, from the way they looked at me as if I were the problem, that I was no longer welcome in their lives. Every attempt I made to reach out, to make amends, to show that I wasn't trying to overstep, was met with silence or disdain. I couldn't help but feel betrayed. How had I gone from being the person who always supported them, who had been there for every milestone and every need, to being treated like an outsider? It was as though they were trying to rewrite the story of our family, casting me as the villain for loving too much. But the worst part was the way they used the villas as ammunition. You think you can buy Sophie's love, they told me in whispered conversations, but we won't let you manipulate her like that. It wasn't about the gift, about the kindness of the gesture. It was about the fact that I had stepped outside of their control, and they couldn't handle it. I tried not to let it affect me, but it was hard. For weeks, I carried the weight of their accusations with me. It felt like I was being erased from the family I had helped create. And despite everything I had done, despite the love and sacrifices I had made for them, nothing seemed to matter. They couldn't see me for who I was. A mother, a grandmother, a woman who simply wanted to show her love in the way she knew how. I had hoped that, in time, they would come around, that they would see past their pride and accept that I was only trying to give my granddaughter a future. But the more they pushed me away, the more I realized that I wasn't going to be able to fix things with them. They had already made up their minds about me, and no amount of explaining or apologizing would change that. And so, With a heavy heart, I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. I wasn't going to keep trying to win their love with grand gestures or gifts. If they couldn't see me for who I truly was, then maybe it was time to stop pretending that I needed to be part of their lives. It was time to let go of the hope that I could ever change their minds. But little did I know, this was just the beginning of a much bigger journey, one that would lead me to find strength I never knew I had. And despite the way they treated me, I knew that one day Sophie would understand. And in the end, that's all that truly mattered. I spent weeks replaying everything in my head, the words, the anger, the looks of disapproval. My son, Ryan, remained neutral, but his silence spoke volumes. I had always known that he would never stand up to Claire and her family, not the way I needed him to. He wasn't the kind of person who made waves, but this time, his inaction hurt more than I could say. I had given him everything, my love, my time, my support, and yet I was left alone to deal with the consequences of a situation I hadn't even created. The house felt different, quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I spent more time in my garden, just sitting there, trying to clear my mind. I used to love these moments, tending to my roses, watching the birds in the trees, but lately even the garden felt like a reflection of my life. Overgrown, neglected, and ignored. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was suffocating. I sat on the bench in the corner of the yard, looking out at the rows of flowers that I had planted over the years, thinking about the decisions I'd made. It wasn't just about the villas or the way my in-laws had treated me. It was about the years I had spent bending over backward to please them, trying so hard to fit into their version of what a mother-in-law should be. For the longest time, I thought that if I could just be helpful enough, just kind enough, just patient enough, they would eventually see me. I thought that if I kept giving, kept supporting, they would come to appreciate who I was and what I had done for them. But the more I gave, the more they took, and the less they acknowledged me. It felt like I was nothing but a shadow, constantly ignored, constantly undervalued. I knew, deep down, that if I didn't make a change, I would lose myself entirely. The thought of continuing to endure their judgment, their dismissal of me, began to feel unbearable. I had always defined myself through my relationships with others, through my role as a mother and a grandmother. But now, all of that seemed so hollow. Was I really just the sum of what I gave to others? Or was I someone who had her own worth, independent of everyone else's approval? That was the moment I realized that something had to change. I couldn't keep waiting for their validation. I couldn't keep hoping that one day they would understand the love I had for Sophie or recognize the sacrifices I had made for the family. I couldn't keep letting them dictate my happiness or my sense of self-worth. It was time to let go. I made the decision to step away. At first, it felt like I was betraying my own family, like I was giving up on something I had spent years trying to build. But as I sat there in the garden, the decision became clearer. I didn't owe them my happiness. I didn't owe them my peace. I had been doing everything for them, but it was time to start doing something for myself. So I made the hard choice to distance myself. I stopped calling, stopped trying to set up family gatherings, stopped going out of my way to fix things. I let the silence stretch between us, and with each passing day, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I didn't have to fight for their approval anymore. I didn't have to bend to their expectations. That doesn't mean it was easy. There were still moments when I'd catch myself thinking about them, wondering if they missed me, if they were sorry for how they treated me. But each time, I reminded myself that I was better off without their toxicity. I had spent so much time trying to make them happy, but in the end, it had only left me drained and empty. I needed to reclaim my life, my joy, my peace. I started focusing on the things that brought me happiness. I spent more time with old friends, people who had always been there for me, people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. I started going to the local park, taking walks in the mornings, doing small things that made me feel alive again. In the evenings, I'd light a candle and pour myself a glass of wine, sitting by the window and watching the sun set over the horizon. It was in those quiet moments that I began to find myself again. I realized how much I had lost over the years by constantly putting others first. I had lost touch with the woman I used to be, the woman who had dreams and passions outside of being a mother and a grandmother. I had forgotten what it felt like to just be me, without the weight of others' expectations pressing down on me. It wasn't easy, but I started to feel like I was healing. Slowly, the empty space inside me began to fill with new possibilities, new interests, and new goals. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. I didn't need their approval to feel worthy. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. I knew that I would always love Sophie, and that I would always be there for her, even if I couldn't be as present as I wanted to be. But I also knew that I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness for people who didn't appreciate me. It was time to move forward, to stop living in the shadows of their judgment. And so, with each passing day, I grew stronger. I learned to let go of the hurt and the resentment, and I began to build a new life for myself, one that was centered around me and my own well-being. I wasn't running away from my family. I was standing up for myself. I was choosing peace, choosing happiness, and most importantly, choosing to be my own person again. It's been a few months since I made the decision to pull away from my in-laws and my son. And while the initial weeks were hard, filled with moments of second-guessing and self-doubt, I now realize how much strength I've gained from standing on my own. It's funny how sometimes you don't know what you're capable of until you're forced to face the silence and the discomfort of your own choices. But here I am, more confident, more grounded, and more sure of who I am than I've been in years. The first few weeks without the constant pressure of trying to meet their expectations were an adjustment. At first, I filled the quiet by binge-watching old sitcoms and scrolling through social media, anything to distract myself from the gnawing feeling of emptiness. But I soon realized that running from the pain wasn't going to solve anything. I had to face the discomfort head-on. I had to learn how to be alone without feeling lonely. So I began to make changes in my routine. I joined a local women's group that met weekly. It was a small group of people who gathered to talk about everything from personal growth to gardening tips, and I immediately felt a sense of belonging. I wasn't the mother-in-law anymore, or the grandmother. I was just Veronica, and that alone was a revelation. These women didn't know me from my family dynamics. They knew me from my own stories, my own experiences, and that felt liberating. I also rediscovered my love for painting. I dabbled in it years ago, but the demands of motherhood and later, being a grandmother, had pushed it to the back burner. With time to spare, I dug out my old paintbrushes and began to experiment with colors again. I can't even describe the peace I felt as I mixed shades of blue and green on my canvas, letting go of everything else in my mind. Painting became my therapy, a way to express everything I'd been feeling without saying a word. It was in those moments that I truly found myself again, creative, independent, and at peace. But beyond the small joys, I started to gain more confidence in my decisions. I realized that I had been living for others for so long that I'd completely forgotten how to live for myself. I was always the one who gave, the one who sacrificed, the one who did everything to make others feel seen and valued. But what about me? What about my needs and desires? I began to reclaim the time I had given away. I took long walks in the mornings, something I hadn't done in years. I traveled on my own to places I had always dreamed of visiting. I went to a bed and breakfast by the coast, just me and my thoughts. There was something so liberating about not having to consider anyone else's schedule or desires. For the first time, I was in charge of my own happiness. The women's group and my new hobbies weren't the only changes I made. I also began to take better care of myself physically. I joined a yoga class, something I'd been hesitant about for years, saying to myself that it was time to put my health first. Yoga helped me reconnect with my body, helped me calm my mind and body in a way I had never known before. The tension I had been holding in my shoulders for years began to ease. I could breathe again, deeply, without feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of others' expectations. As I spent more time focusing on myself, I started to feel a shift within me. The Veronica I used to be, before all the sacrifices, before all the years spent trying to make everyone happy, started to emerge again. She was confident, curious, and full of life. She didn't need validation from anyone, especially not from people who never truly saw her. It wasn't easy, I won't lie. There were days when I would miss Sophie, when I'd ache for the moments I would never have with her. I would think about Ryan and wonder if he felt guilty for what had happened. But I also knew that I had made the right decision. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. I wasn't drowning in other people's expectations anymore. I was breathing freely, without the constant worry of being judged. The distance from my son and his wife, though still painful, allowed me to see things more clearly. I wasn't just the mother or the grandmother. I was Veronica, a woman who deserved to be treated with respect, love, and kindness. And while I may have lost some relationships along the way, I gained something even more important, myself. I learned that independence doesn't just mean being alone, it means being strong enough to stand up for your own worth, even when no one else does. It's about rediscovering your passions, your voice, and your power. It's about realizing that you can be whole on your own, without needing anyone else's approval to feel worthy. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who is no longer willing to shrink for others. I see someone who has found strength in solitude and has learned how to stand tall, even when the world around her is falling apart. I've learned to value my own voice and my own life, and that's the greatest strength I could ever have found. I had long given up on expecting an apology from my son. After everything that had happened, his silence, his complicity in my exclusion from his daughter's life, and the complete lack of acknowledgement for the sacrifices I'd made, I didn't think I would ever hear the words, "I'm sorry." I had built walls around my heart to protect myself from any more disappointment. Yet, life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect them. And this one came in the form of a letter. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when I first saw it, lying on the counter as I walked in from my morning yoga class. The envelope was plain, nothing remarkable about it, except for the handwriting on the front. It was Ryan's. My heart skipped a beat. I stood frozen for a moment, my hand hovering over the letter. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks, not since I made the difficult decision to stop trying to please everyone and focus on my own peace. Could this really be an apology? Could he have finally realized how wrong they had all been? I took a deep breath and opened it carefully, almost as if I was afraid the paper would crumble in my hands. The letter was short, but it carried a weight that words alone couldn't explain. I sat down on the couch, holding the letter with trembling hands, and began to read. Mom, I don't know how to begin this, but I've realized I've made a terrible mistake. I've let my wife and her family dictate how I treat you. I've been blind to the way you've been treated, and I see now how much I've hurt you. I never stood up for you when I should have. I never valued what you've done for me, for us, and for our daughter. I'm sorry for abandoning you when you needed me most. You're not just my mother. You're a person with your own dreams, feelings, and needs, and I failed to see that. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, but I hope one day you can. I should have been there for you, and I wasn't. I'm sorry. Ryan, I didn't know what to feel at first. My eyes blurred with tears, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. All these months, I'd been holding on to anger, hurt, and frustration, convinced that my son had completely shut me out. But here was this letter acknowledging the depth of his mistake, admitting that he had been wrong. It was more than I had ever hoped for. I don't know why I was surprised. After everything that had happened, I had resigned myself to the idea that I would always be the villain in this story. But in this letter, Ryan was showing me a side of him I hadn't seen in years, the part of him that understood and recognized the pain he'd caused. It wasn't enough to erase all the hurt, but it was a start, a significant one. I folded the letter carefully and set it down on the coffee table. My mind was racing. What now? What do I do with this apology? I couldn't simply brush it off, but I couldn't immediately forgive him either. There was too much damage, too much that had been left unsaid over the years, but one thing was clear to me. I wasn't alone in this anymore. Ryan, for all his mistakes, was finally seeing me as a person, not just as his mother or a caregiver. He was acknowledging that I was deserving of respect and love, something I had fought so hard for. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I thought about the letter constantly. I reread it more times than I care to admit. But even though I wasn't ready to rush into forgiveness, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't completely invisible. Ryan had seen me. He had seen the pain I'd been carrying, and he had owned up to his role in it. I debated calling him. I wanted to, but I didn't want to do anything in haste. I needed to take time with this. I wasn't going to pretend that everything was fine, or that I wasn't still hurt by how things had played out. But a small part of me was hopeful. I didn't know what the future would look like, but I knew this was a step in the right direction. Maybe, just maybe, things could begin to heal. In the days that followed, I found myself less angry, less bitter. It wasn't just the letter that had shifted things for me. It was the realization that Ryan was trying. I wasn't sure if this apology would lead to anything meaningful, or if it would be another empty gesture lost in time. But for now, I decided to give myself permission to hope, to believe that perhaps, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. I still don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had a chance at something more with my son. Something real, something rooted in respect. And that, to me, was worth holding on to. After months of rebuilding, I decided to host a dinner, surrounded by the people who truly cared about me. It wasn't about pleasing anyone anymore. It was about celebrating who I had become. The evening was filled with warmth and laughter, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. Ryan and his family showed up later, apologizing for their past actions. But I made it clear, I had moved on, and my life was now in my hands. That night, I reclaimed my power. I wasn't just a mother or grandmother. I was finally me.